Let's resume. Welcome Professor Anthony Chung and his team. We have 3 papers today on with regards to the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, Hong Kong boundary crossing facilities. This item was scheduled for 10 to 10:50 a.m. Now the time is 10:40 a.m. So we have around 1 hour until 11:40. So we have to shorten the time for the part on the policy address. 10 minutes each. Let's invite the administration to walk us through the papers first. Thank you very much, Chairman. Today, we'd like to we propose to increase the approved project estimate or APE of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge Hong Kong Boundary Facilities project. And the original funding was $30,433.9 million. And at that time, we took reference from the prices of similar major projects, including construction costs, bidding costs, and after that, the construction costs increased. For example, for superstructures, drainage works, etc., the construction costs for all these things increased. And at the end of 2013 and as of 2014, the estimates, the construction costs were about 40% higher than the estimates, and there were a few reasons for the increases of costs, including increase in prices of machineries and labor, and construction costs also rose, and investors were also more unsure about the cost outlook. And after in-depth assessment on the costs, we would like to propose increasing the approved project estimate by 5,461.1 million. In other words, from 30,433.9 million to 35,895 million. The details are laid out in the paper. And of the 10 works projects of this works contracts of this project, they make up around 70% of the works completed so far, and so our estimates at present would be relatively accurate. The HKBCF project faces a lot of challenges, including cost considerations, and with the government's cost control measures, the Director of Highway will walk us through the details. I'm aware that a lot of members are concerned with the progress of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, so I'd like to make a brief reports today. The HKZMB is a major project in collaboration with 2 other cities, and the total length is 41.6 kilometers, and the latest technologies are utilized. And upon completion, it would be the largest bridge tunnel structure in the world. And the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge Authority conducted a study in the PRD, and the Guangdong, Macau, and Hong Kong governments will take charge of the respective parts. And the project will be completed by October 2016. And with this target, various works are underway. This is certainly a mega project in terms of design and construction. We face a lot of technical challenges, and for the main bridge and the relevant constructions at the 3 cities, we face a lot of difficulties and challenges. And we've been reviewing the progress of various works, and safety and quality are paramount. And according to statistics from the third quarter of last year, a tri-party committee was set up by the three administrations, and we agree that the project could not complete in time, and this was reported last year. And this meeting was chaired by the National Reform Committee and attended by representatives from the three authorities. And the authority and the three administrations were requested to conduct in-depth analysis in order to ascertain the timeline for the bridge projects. And the Highway Department also conducted detailed analysis. And the HKBCF was scheduled to begin at the end of 2010, but due to a number of reasons, the HKBCF construction work only started in November 2011, and the HKBCF construction works only started in April last year. So timeline is extremely tight, and we faced the challenge of inadequate labor and various environmental conditions. And the HKBCF was scheduled to begin in mid-2011, but due to the judicial review of for the EIA assessment, work only started in May 2012. And apart from the tight timeline, the project faced geological and environmental challenges, as well as requirements of the environmental permit. And with the current at the current pace, the HKBCF and Hong Kong Link Road might not be able to complete by the end of 2016. And the Highway Department is still conducting a comprehensive review on when the commence dates, when the completion date will be. And we will monitor the progress of the project closely and make sure that the contractors are working according to the schedule. So let's invite the Director of Highway to walk us through the details. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to outline two aspects of our work through this PowerPoint presentation. First is an increase in the approved project estimates, and first on the approved project estimate. And since a lot of the prices we received for the works contracts were higher than the original estimates in 2011, as such, the work number 845TH, the APE was not enough to pay for all the works, and as such, the APE was increased from 30.4 billion to 35.8 billion. And there are two main reasons. And the first is that the costs of the superstructure works were higher than expected, and second, increase in provision for price adjustment. And when we designed the superstructure works, including the boundary crossing facilities, we tried to adopt cost-saving measures. And in terms of tendering and procurement, we tried to minimize the scales of the small works in order to increase the number of contractors and, as such, lower the bidding prices. And as said, the bids we received were still higher than expected, and there were two main reasons. And Hong Kong and its neighboring cities are undergoing a number of major works, and there's great demand for machineries, materials, and labor, and as such, the costs were increased. And bidders also assign higher risk due to the short working time spans. And there have been delays caused by the judicial review, and as such, we did not have a lot of time for the construction. And second, the bidders might reflect the higher construction risks on the prices they submitted. And as such, the bids were higher than we expected. And in most construction contracts by the government, the prices would be adjusted according to the market situation. And when establishing the engineering costs or construction costs, we would assess the market prices and cash flow and make corresponding adjustments. And in 2011, we looked at the various factors, and we reserved 243 billion, and we felt the need to adjust the price adjustment level to 2.2 billion, and the two main reasons were the higher than expected cost of superstructure works and increase in provision for price adjustment. But we can save costs in other areas, including engineering costs. Since we understand the bidding prices for most work, so our costs, our risks are relatively lower. And such, we do not have to reserve so much money for contingencies. And having considered all the above factors, and we propose to increase the APE by 5.4 billion. So I will continue to outline some of the challenges faced by the Hong Kong Dry Macau Bridge. The project is divided into the main bridge, the Hong Kong Link Road, and HKBCF. And the main bridge is located in mainland waters, and it's taken up by the Bridge Authority. And for Hong Kong, we have to deal with the Hong Kong Link Road, Tuen Mun Tunnel Link, and HKBCF. And we need a lot of fill materials, or 25 million square meters, as well as 3.5 million of stones. But due to a lack of due to unstable supply of sea fill and stone fill, the progress is more or less hampered. And due to height restrictions of the government, the methodology for constructing the superstructures must be in line with requirements of the airports. And in the coming 2 years, it will be a peak period for superstructure works in Hong Kong, and for the next 2 years, we have 4 main works contracts, including the vehicle clearance facilities, 2 bridge or road contracts, and customs building, and because of noise restrictions, adjustments have to be made in order to minimize the impacts of the reclamation project on the ocean. The HKBCF artificial island would adopt a non-dredging method, and since the distribution of mud is more complicated than expected, more studies have to be done. So to sum up, we hope members can support the proposal to increase the APE, and I hope members also agree with our decision to file this application to PWSC. So we have 9 members who'd like to ask questions, 5 minutes each. So 15 minutes and 15 minutes for the administration to respond. We have 60 minutes total, so we will have 60 minutes for the policy address. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, Chen Kem Lam, Chen Han Pan, Wu Chi Wai, Teng Ka Piu, Michael Tian, Claudia Mo, Lo Wai Kwok, Tony Che. 10. We have 10 members in total. 5 minutes each. I will draw a line. Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Thank you, Chairman. We inevitably faced a lot of challenges for the Hong Kong-Macau Bridge. And some of the things could not be anticipated by the government. This I understand. I think we have to solve any issues with construction costs as they arise. The judicial review, as mentioned by the government, is something nobody can expect. So I hope no one can stand in the way of the construction of this bridge. The administration mentioned the rise in costs for superstructure works. I'd like the administration to clarify that the bridge has no superstructure works. Are those superstructure works referring to the boundary crossing buildings? And I'm also concerned with the problem of sludge and or sand fill, and most of these materials come from the mainland, and the supply in mainland is very tight, and the prices are also increasing. So in this regard, would the government first confirm the supply and prices with the suppliers ahead of time? I understand that the government might leave this to the contractors, but since we have, even though we have a price adjustment mechanism with the ever-rising costs, how can we guarantee fixed prices with the suppliers? So I really hope you cannot come back to us later and ask for even more money. So can you address this? With regards to cost control and the difficulties we place, maybe the director can give more. And but overall speaking, as I said, those 10 works contracts, which make up about 70% of the works completed so far, we have granted 7 works contracts, and they make up about 90% of the total costs. So our approved project estimate is more or less accurate, and there's not much chance that it will be off the mark. First, I'd like to address Mr. Jeffrey Lam's question. What are the superstructure works we're referring to? We are referring to the bridge boundary crossing facilities, cargo clearance facilities, passenger clearance facilities, offices for the administration, and the relevant bridges and roads. So these are for clearance purposes. And in terms of cost control, as we mentioned, 90% of our budget came with relevant bids, and on the supply of the sludge, it is a problem with an issue with the supply, and recently, and a lot of suppliers in Guangdong province were closed down due to environmental considerations, and as such, we are looking at a tense supply, and we are working with our with our contractors to come up with alternative materials. For instance, some people are using concrete materials for land reclamation as an alternative. So we are looking at possibilities with our contractors. So in line with project needs, we would monitor our contractors to make sure that the project is completed on time. I support what's being written on the paper, but my question is on the supply of sludge. Can we discuss with the suppliers or contractors to ensure a stable supply? 30 seconds, please. We have approved it, but if we have any delays in the future because of the lack of supply, we will face problems.
As mentioned just now, we're now thinking of substitute materials to address the problem. As we have funding for contingency, it should be sufficient to cover the substitute materials. Mr. Chen Kam Lam, Mr. Chairman, just now the Undersecretary, or rather the Secretary, mentioned works on our part and works on the other two sides. It's very difficult to have complete matching among the three jurisdictions. I would like to know more about the agreements between us and Macau and Zhuhai respectively, which may lead to increased expenditure. That's number one. Number two, for this supplementary funding of $5 billion, I believe the Secretary understands that now in LegCo there's a non-cooperation campaign which may drag you on for a long period of time. At the moment, two tenders are to be awarded and another due for a completion of accepting bids. We still have two more major hurdles to overcome. If the pandemocrats are to filibuster again for, say, another few weeks or another few months, how will that impact on tendering? Secretary, I'll defer to the Director about the bidding prices and for how long we can sustain ourselves. As I said in my opening remarks, at the end of last year, Guangdong, Macau and Hong Kong, through the relevant ministries and bureaus, considered the latest situation of the bridges and link roads. As for the main bridge, as it is in mainland waters, engineering assessment was also conducted. Quite many major challenges are facing us. The Director will supplement in a moment. After this careful assessment, all the three jurisdictions reported to the authority of the bridge. Now, if we are to complete all the works concurrently by the end of 2016, there are huge difficulties. We need to conduct further detailed assessment. In Hong Kong, we've conducted our own assessment, and just now I've reported to you. For the whole HZMB, if there's any delay, the major impact is related to the actual commissioning date, because after commissioning we're going to receive proceeds, but that will not directly impact on the overall expenditure. Mr. Chairman, two more contracts will be granted very soon, and we have sufficient funding for that. There are another three. We started tendering for one of them just recently, and later we'll tender for the other two contracts. For the main bridge of the HZMB, we do have construction difficulties. The main bridge is a 30-kilometer bridge cum underpass project. The underpass is 40-odd meters deep underwater, so that's rather difficult. For each section, its length is 180 meters, 18,000 tons in weight. It's just like the weight of an aircraft carrier. And such portions have to be placed underwater in the middle of the Pearl River Delta. And that's to be heavily affected by weather and water current. Now, this is in open sea, and internationally, we don't have much experience. Well, you said that the original completion date is 2016, but now there may be slippage. No matter what, you think you have sufficient funding, right? Well, we got 90% of the bidding prices back already. That is, irrespective of the completion date, you have enough funding, right? Yes, unless prices soar heavily and unforeseeably. Well, Mr. Chairman, he didn't tell us the validity period of the tendering documents. We're up to February and March, but we have sufficient funding for the 2 contracts. But what about the 3 outstanding contracts? Well, it depends on the tendering dates. All right, so for the 2 already granted, February and March would be the deadline. Well, by 2009, 2010, we should have started. Already a delay over 2008, but then we got the litigations. Altogether, we lost over $10 billion. In fact, the litigation costs should be borne by the political parties concerned. That's a public judgment. Now, we have this so-called traffic light system. Well, which works projects are still not given the green light. Yes, a number of works projects are still outstanding. Do they really need $5 billion in one go, whether or not it's for contingency or future expenses? $5 billion is over 10%, actually 16% of the overall cost. Have you been too conservative, or are you now trying to get the money from us first, irrespective of whether the money will actually be used, and you're going to plow back the residual sum to us? For the clearance building, that is the boundary control facility, the design looks rather grand. What if the overall details are changed? Will that building be demolished? If that's to happen, will it be a waste? If you intend to demolish that building, then we don't need the funding now in order to avoid wastage. I'll answer the fundamental questions first, and then I'll defer to the director. For the BCF, the superstructure has not yet included further developments, but any further developments should not affect the commissioning date of the bridge and the superstructure facilities like the clearance facilities. So the commissioning date won't be postponed. As for contingency fund, for all capital works projects, we have to keep a sufficient level of cash flow, so that's covered by contingency. This so-called traffic light system is like this. We have absorbed experience from the XRL project. Now, regularly, every month, we discussed with all relevant departments, including the Highways Department, to make sure that all major transport infrastructure projects adopt the so-called traffic light system, which will serve as a rough reminder. Now, the system is good because under the system we can focus on the works, because a project covers many works contracts. Well, sometimes the critical path may not be affected, the overall completion date may not be affected, but it really depends. We cannot say for sure that there won't be any impact. Anyway, internally in the government, all these proposals have passed our assessment, internal assessment. The red light is now on. Is that correct? Well, overall speaking, there are risks. Yes, the red light is on. What about the pillars for the bridge? Is there a red light also? we're behind schedule insofar as the Hong Kong Link Road and the bridge pillars are concerned. Why do we need the $5 billion now? From the bidding prices, we can see that we need more funds before we can complete all the works. And I mentioned the two main reasons. That's why we need $5.4 billion more. For the superstructure, the Development Bureau has come up with new proposals made on the principle that the commissioning date of the bridge won't be affected and the construction works will not affect the BCF of the bridge. At the moment, the thinking is like this. They will make use of the topside space and the underground space. Take, for example, on top of or underneath the transport facilities. So the BCF and clearance facilities won't be affected. Mr. Chairman, what about the main bridge? Well, Mr. Wu Chiu-wai, what about the main bridge? Just now we heard about works difficulties. May I ask this? For the main bridge itself, will there be overspending such that eventually we have to take up a bigger portion of the overall expenditure? Number two, a major cause for rising costs is that construction costs have been rising. It's because we have a tight schedule. Now, you will disregard the pace beyond Hong Kong. But for Hong Kong itself, the completion date is still 2016, end of 2016. If that is the case, you're actually forcing the costs up yourself. According to the work schedule, can we cause the construction cost to go down instead? In the afternoon, in the FC, you will have another proposal on development studies for the future BCP, Boundary Control Point. What about the loading of the bridge pillars? Have you done any preparation work? Of course, the ideal situation is to make use of the superstructure of the clearance building. Anyway, I'd like to know whether you've made any preparation. Well, there are three questions. One is about the specific works arrangements. I'll defer to the director for that. Now, for the main bridge and different parts of the whole bridge, the question is if all parts are to be delayed, how will that impact on construction cost? In fact, all the three jurisdictions are proceeding with full steam. In particular, we're working hard on the main bridge. That doesn't mean that we are to relax our effort. We got 10 contracts for the BCF. 7 are undergoing tendering. The later we proceed, the higher the cost will be. As for the main bridge and the construction challenges, at the present stage, we cannot specifically assess the impact of slippage and whether or not costs will be affected. The authority is conducting an assessment. According to the original arrangements for financing, the overall investment will be 38.1 billion renminbi. There's financing on all the 3 jurisdictions and some other portions raised by way of loans. 6.75 billion renminbi on the Hong Kong side. Well, as of 2014, theoretically, we've gone very, very far into the whole project. How much have we actually spent? It's highly likely that Hong Kong will be overspending. Oh, you are asking about the main bridge? Yes. Mr. Chairman, I don't have the information here. You haven't conducted any assessment yet? We have conducted an assessment, but here I don't have the information. Before the Finance Committee meeting, can you give us the information? What about your assessment? Is it still 92? Well, this is not for Hong Kong. It's for the authority to do. They follow the criteria on the mainland, so we don't have the specific data here. Next, Mr. Tan Ka-piu. Thank you, Chairman. In paragraph 32 on policy initiatives, it said that they won't be able to beat the deadline of the end of 2016. But last year, the Secretary took the initiative to clarify that the commissioning date would still be the end of 2016. Now, they can't even say for sure that the facilities can be commissioned in 2017. Is it that the mainland side has not come up with the details on progress? That's why you came out to clarify. You focused on overspending more than on slippage. Is that the case? Secondly, the mainland side said something about progress up to this moment. I'd like to have your position as well. Now, there are 3 parts to the whole project. One is the main bridge. Another one includes link roads as well as boundary crossing facilities. According to the original planning, I'd like to know the apportionment among the 3 jurisdictions. $13 billion for the artificial island. Well, there are small road sections between the bridge and the airport. They're not mentioned here. Well, less is mentioned about the Chiu Mun Mongkok link due for commissioning in 2017. I'd like to know the latest progress. The second question about the Hong Kong Link Road and the Chiu Mun Mongkok link, I'll defer to the director for its progress. In November last year, I did not say that we did not have any problems with the bridge. I can only say that all along we've been using 2016 as the commissioning date for all the 3 sides. In November last year, I only clarified issues related to expenditure. In my opening remarks, I explained that in the 3rd quarter of last year, the 3 sides assessed respectively their own works. In terms of work schedule, were under greater and greater pressure. We're now in the middle of the whole project, so we really need to have a midway assessment. The overall view now is that for the various parts of the whole bridge, concurrent commissioning, if maintained at the end of 2016, will have huge difficulties. It's difficult to say for now when we need a comprehensive assessment. Now, the Director of Highways assessment is that it is highly likely that we cannot meet the scheduled commissioning date of the end of 2016.
Regarding the BCF, we are now, doing the reclamation, and I think we've completed about 69% of the works. For the crossing facility, the project was awarded in January 2014. We are only starting with the piling, and also the limit boring is being done regarding the BCF. For the Hong Kong Link Road, we are now conducting reclamation, and also the airport island, and also the overall speaking, I think we estimated that 43% of the works have been completed. What is the original target? Well, I don't have the figure offhand. What about the Chiu Mun Link going further to North Lantao? Well, that road is divided into two sections. The southern section is a bridge, 3.5 kilometers long. I think there's a slippage of about 3 months. The contractor is now working hard to catch up. The northern section is a tunnel, and it's on schedule. Director, I think you've actually, given us an explanation which is even poorer than that of the MTRCL. Now, to sum up, there are 4 sections to the Hong Kong Zhuhai Macau Bridge. The main section, 9.2 billion. Hong Kong apparently 16 point something billion, going up to more than 20 billion. Well, reclamation is 30 billion. Now you are asking for another 5.4 billion, making it 35.4 billion. What I'm most worried about, and Mr. Teng also mentioned this earlier, the biggest chunk is the Chiu Mun Link. Original budget is 44.7 billion. Altogether, the total was 100 billion. Now, if we approve this, it will become 143 billion. That's what we are worried most about, is the Chiu Link. You asked for funding in 1.3. You promised that it will be complete by 2018. I really like to know how much of the projects have you awarded the contract already. Now you've awarded 30 billion. You are asking for another 5 billion, 477. You're asking for another 10%. It could easily be close to 10 billion. The total sum may end up to be 120, 130 billion. So tell us, for the $44.7 billion worth of work, how much of that have been contracted already? And secondly, for cost variation, I think we have a major problem here. In 2011, the approved budget was 6 billion. 3 years later, it's up by 2.2 billion. My understanding is that when government approves its budget, it will invite tender, and the tender documents spell out clearly that in future, should there be any if there is any variations to the original estimate, then you would approve additional funding accordingly. Over the last few years, you're asking for another 6 billion, and now we're told that it's actually not 6 billion, but it's more than 2 billion. It's 40%. So for the government's projection of future inflation, if it could, vary by 40%, why don't you change the entire concept? So that when you invite tender, you tell the contractor or the bidder that they must, deliver the whole project according to the original budget. The original amount they put in might not have been 8.2 billion. The advantage is that you don't need to come back to us for more funding. Given the relationship between the executive and the legislature, you really know that there will be price variations. Other than that, you need to ask for even more funding. If at the beginning you ask the contractor to shoulder the the full amount, and that the bid which comes in should cover all the costs. Obviously, the bid coming in will be more expensive, but then it will save you a lot of unnecessary work. Would you consider rehauling the whole approach in awarding contracts? I'll ask the director to give you more details regarding the Chilapkok link, and also the how we calculate the contingency for price cost variation all along for government projects. The budget is based on the cost, the data at the time when the project was submitted to LegCo for approval, whether or not the government would not speculate, especially for projects which straddle over a long period of time. What will be the projected inflation rate and so on? Yes. Why don't you ask the contractor to shoulder that risk? I think this is the government's philosophy. So I think it can save you a lot of effort if you would ask the other party to shoulder the risk. I understand that in the industry there are different approaches in dealing with tenders. Sometimes they will share the risk. Would you be prepared to review this approach, Chairman? We certainly take your suggestion back to the administration for consideration. It can save LegCo a lot of time if we take the chairman's advice, and we will come to LegCo. You may ask us why we are making such a projection. Are we giving too much interest to, to benefit the bidders? What about the 44 billion? How was that arrived at? We've already awarded 90% of the contract. 44.4 billion, 44.7 billion for the Chilapkok project. We've already awarded 3 contracts, which make up 90% of the costs, and they're all within budget. So the 44.7 billion will not have any cost overrun. Yes, it's all within budget. Mr. Wong Kok Heng, thank you. Chairman, I'm concerned about the cost overrun of 5.6 odd billion dollars, and this is the amount you're asking, according to your paper. The original estimate was $30 billion. Your latest estimate now is $35.9 billion dollars. We all know that, as the Secretary said at the beginning of the meeting, the Hong Kong-Macau Bridge project, for this project, right at the outset, it was affected by the judicial review, as a result of which the project was delayed for 1 year. And now taxpayers have to pay for the extra cost incurred. I'd like to thank the Civic Party for supporting that judicial review, and now we have to pay for the additional cost. I therefore would like to ask the Secretary this question. Even though we are now asked to pay for the extra costs, the whole denominator, given the 1 year delay, the denominator is now $30 billion dollars. The denominator has increased, and the 1 year delay has caused all the different expenses to have gone up. You have not given us the details here. Could you give us the details? The project has been delayed for a year, and because of inflation and other reasons, and of course wages would have gone up, same for the cost of materials. By how much have they gone up? We're talking about, of the 5.4 billion, how much extra will the taxpayers be asked to pay? And secondly, on page 6 of the annex, note 5, since we need to deal with the judicial review, there was, a hearing in the courts. So, how much litigation costs did the government spend on the JR? Again, we're not given such figures. We would like to know how much we actually have to pay now. It's time for us to foot the bill. So, how much did we spend on the JR? And the party applying for the JR, I understand that it was a Tung Chung resident. My recollection is that it was a lady who had applied for legal aid. Again, taxpayers have to foot the bill. So how much did that cost? How much legal aid was, awarded to her? That might not be counted as part of the $5 billion. But anyway, taxpayers have to pay for the expenses. So could the secretary tell us? Because we now have to pay all these different amounts and the denominator is going up all the time. It has actually, well, it's because of the 1 year delay that you have all these cumulative increases in costs. Have you also worked out those sums? Secretary. Regarding the judicial review and the litigation costs and the costs involved for the legal aid, I don't have the information offhand. Yes, you can certainly provide those information to us later on. Regarding the additional expenses, when we applied for funding in 2011, we said that it has cost to go up by 6.5 billion, according to money per day prices. We've actually worked out the impact at the time. But given that the project was delayed, and we've tried our best to stick to the original timetable, so therefore the schedule became very tight, and as a result the bidders also took into account the pressure arising from the tighter schedule when they put in the bid. Chairman, the bids which came in were rather expensive, because for the last 3 years from 2011 and 2014, prices of raw materials, machineries, and wages have also gone up. All these increases in costs have resulted in the bidders, the contractors, putting in a contingency in the quotes. So don't always tell us that we need to import labor in order. It was actually the judicial review which caused all these project overruns. We must, point out that this was the reason. Claudia MO. I don't think we need to be so agitated. Judicial review is a tool for the public to monitor government's policy and see whether or not it has jeopardized the overall interests of our society. I don't know why Mr. Wong is so agitated about. Chairman, I think what you are saying is actually challenging the independence of our judiciary. Chairman, I agree with you when you said that when we call for tender, is it possible that we would explicitly spell out what would be the risk be? According to the MTRCL procedure, you said that you have to make allowance for claims after the project is completed. When you call for bids in future, for any additional risks which might arise, such as claims, could you, ask the contractors to bear that risk while you prepare for more higher price? Or is it the case that if we adopt this approach, nobody will put it to bed? Well, he said that he's worried that people accuse the government of collusion. All right, that's my first question. Second question, 5.4 billion is really a large sum, even though you have a contingency, but eventually the contingency will be exhausted. The ideal timetable that you have, but you don't have a deadline. Thirdly, for the Hong Kong Zhuhai Macau Bridge, there have been several fatal incidents in the course of the project. When you awarded the tender, did you select the contractors according to the track record in terms of safety and industrial accidents? Was that a major consideration? My final question is that for the time being, after the bridge is completed, what will be the quota how do you work out the additional number of licenses for people to drive on the bridge? Chairman, regarding the way we award, we call for tender. Conceptually, you can say there are two possible approaches. One approach is to ask the contractor to shoulder all the costs in the project. Of course, there are still other certain things which cannot be covered, such as natural disasters. If we adopt what the chairman suggested, the bidder will have to take into calculation many risks. The longer the project takes, the more risks would entail, and then the tender price will be higher. So the government would then have to assess whether or not the tender price is reasonable. But anyway, we've heard the chairman's suggestion, and we'll be prepared to think about it. Regarding people who drive on the bridge and cross the border, straddling between Hong Kong and Guangdong. Well, this is a pilot scheme for phase 1 of the scheme. It would only involve people driving from Hong Kong to the mainland. The second phase involves people driving from the mainland to Hong Kong. We don't have that. We don't intend to implement that yet. Right now, the daily quota is now 50. We've not yet reached the full quota yet. We will continue to monitor the situation, and if necessary, we will negotiate with the Guangdong authorities. Regarding the question of contingency, Mr. Chen Kam Long already referred to it earlier. We still have 3 contracts which have to be awarded. It is our plan that in the 3rd quarter of this year, we will award those contracts. Before the 3rd quarter, we hope we'll be able to obtain the additional funding so that we have the money to award those tenders. This is the small part that is still outstanding, right? Secondly, the question regarding accidents, the answer is yes. Where we assess the bids, the safety record of the contractor certainly will be one of the considerations. We also have standard requirements requiring the contractors, the contractors to come up with a series of safety measures, including setting up of safety committees to monitor site safety. Mr. Lo Kwok, thank you. Chairman, when we heard that the Hong Kong Macau Bridge project is going to have a budget overrun of $5 billion, all of us are very concerned. We're particularly concerned about the completion date for the project. I remember that it was reviewed at the time that we were looking at the completion date of the end of 2016, but some parts of the project certainly would not be able to be completed by 2016, but it would not affect the service commissioning, including certain traffic control systems, which upon completion of the project, even if they were not completed at the time of completion, it will not affect the commissioning of the service. So that's one example. I'm most worried about the main parts of the bridge is now completed except for Hong Kong. As a result, the commission of the whole bridge will be affected. And this is a serious problem. As many members already asked earlier, and as the administration has explained, we're talking about all the parties concerned are coordinating and reviewing the situation. And if there is going to be a delay, and I don't think we should try to cut costs. If there's a delay for a year, costs will go up by 5 to 10%. I think this is common knowledge. So I'd like to know what I'd like to know is that whether or not there is a contradiction between what the media reported earlier on what we are hearing today, and also which are the parts of the project which will be completed before the end of 2016, and which are the parts which will not affect the commissioning of the bridge. And the question was asked whether or not, with the article, the contractors are putting the bids to cover all the costs in the bid. Well, I'm sure all the contractors will simply factor in all the possible risks in the bid, and the contract will become even more expensive. If we don't want Lantao to have the debate over these contracts, and if you ask the government to make allowance and prepare for even bigger budget, then I don't think that's the right approach.
At the end, the Lantao will be to blame. The members are actually happy to review the projects. So I think that would be the correct approach. Thank you, Mr. Low Kwok. And Secretary, the Lantao has a role to play in terms of monitoring the government, in terms of cost control. So we wouldn't say that we would avoid this monitoring. So our project was devised based on objective criteria for any projects, notwithstanding the Hong Kong Macau Bridge. Not all works have to be completed before the commissioning. Some can be completed after the commissioning. So even when commissioning can go ahead in 2016, certain parts of the work will inevitably be completed after that. And as with the overall progress of the project, as I mentioned earlier, the progress does not only hinge on Hong Kong. Other mainland and other structures in the mainland are also facing issues. So Hong Kong is not the culprit in terms of the overall delay. Director, when we consider the contracts, we considered certain cost-saving measures. And on the day of commissioning, not all facilities need to be completed. For instance, some measures such as greening and plants can be done afterwards, and the number of boundary crossing booths can also be completed later. So we can have certain priorities and afford more flexibility to the contractors, and hopefully we can receive lower bids. And on the tendering process, if they had to make such a promise at that time, they would come up with much higher bids. That's my guess. Mr. Tony Chan, thank you, Chairman. Recently, a lot of mega government construction projects have gone over the budget. I'm very disappointed and surprised. So do the relevant departments who are responsible for the monitoring have to be held accountable? I think the answer is very obviously yes. And the director mentioned some cost-saving measures. I think what he mentioned should be something regular. They shouldn't be things done only in case of cost overruns. So cost-saving measures should be the norm. They shouldn't be done because of the cost overrun. And in terms of procurement and tendering, our sector have always had a lot to say in terms of the practice. So I understand that you might be reluctant to change some long-standing practices, but I hope you will at least conduct a review to see whether this is the best practice. Times are changing and our sectors are facing various challenges, so why don't you conduct a review? we have to think about the overall strategy. Chairman, for the judicial review, it's inevitably led to delays, so it's really a separate case we can look at. We have to look at the delays in the construction progress and the rise in construction costs. Now we are at 2015, and we are only at the start of 2015. Yes, that's right. Chairman, if we have to shorten the construction time, then there won't be delays. Well, if the construction time is shortened, then yes, yet there will be a delay. Where do we go from there? When we look at Annex 5, when you look at items C, D, E, H, K, etc., the overruns have amounted to 50% or even 80% in some cases. I'd like to know the reasons for these overruns. Were they because of the rising cost of materials and wages and so on? I'm sure the government commissions consultants for this project. Did they consult an independent consultant on to look at the cost estimates? And this consultant must report directly to the government instead of other consultants. And on project monitoring and project estimate, I'll leave it to the director. The Highway Department is conducting a thorough review. And in fact, the 3 administrations involved are conducting a review, and we'll come back to the Legislative Council later to report on the results of the review. What about the monitoring? Thank you very much for the questions. In terms of monitoring, as the papers mentioned very clearly, we have 2 major reasons for increasing the ABE. First, the higher than expected bids coming back, and the second is the increase in provision for price adjustment. And the higher bids were due to rising costs of machineries and labor from 2011 to 2014. When we look at cranes, machines, some of these, the rents for these common machines have increased by 30 to 55%. Please be brief. And for the shortening of the construction time and the delay of the project, and there are several reasons for the overall project delay. It might be substandard work by the contractors, and we also have sometimes we encounter unexpected geological conditions. Can you give us breakdowns of the increases of specific items, Mr. Tang? And in November 2014, and for item HY 2015/05, and they will be done by 2017 when the bridge is commissioned. Will there be any monitoring to gauge impacts to transportation, impacts to other surrounding areas, and would the Chek Lap Kok Tuen Mun Link be compromised? And you're asking for 5.5 billion in extra funds, and before you mentioned that the budget overrun of the bridge could be contained to within $5 billion, but now we are only talking about the Hong Kong section of the BCF, and we haven't included the Hong Kong Link Road, Tuen Mun, Chek Lap Kok, as well as the top-sided developments. So 5.5 billion is a big amount of money. Would the government first consider reducing the scale of the HKBCF, and later on, would you consider expanding the scale again according to the actual traffic situation? We have a lot of mega projects going on at the moment, and as such, the construction costs are rising. So these are my two questions. The first question, I will leave it to the director. Why would we postpone the signaling systems until after the bridge is commissioned? And second, the 5 billion referred to the original scope of the project. It doesn't include future commercial developments at the BCF. It merely covered the cargo and passenger clearing facilities, government offices, etc. The 5.4 billion is not the overall increase in cost of the entire bridge projects. As I mentioned, the bridge consists of the main bridge, the link between the three cities, and the 5.4 billion refers to the Hong Kong section. And the original estimate was 30.4 billion, and increase in 54.6. It amounts to about 84 billion. And the traffic monitoring system is necessary. We decided to implement it by phase because the contract for the traffic monitoring system consists of a few parts, including one for the Tuen Mun Chek Lap Kok link. And the southern part of the link is scheduled to finish by 2016, and the northern part for Tuen Mun will be completed by 2018. For the $44.7 billion, you said 90% were already granted, right? What about the links to the south of the Tuen Mun Chek Lap Kok link? They wouldn't be commissioned on time, right? No, that's not what I meant. Upon commissioning, the monitoring systems must be completed, but they can be implemented by phase because not everything must be finished by 2016. The monitoring systems can be completed at a later stage. So far, we are talking about 114.3 billion. So far, as as the main bridge is concerned. Hong Kong is involved in funding the main bridge, and for the Hong Kong Bridge, HKBCF and the Chek Lap Kok Tuen Mun link. The total amounts is at that time 112.2 billion Hong Kong dollars. What about the latest figure? There was more funding for the Hong Kong link, and we are applying for extra funds at this point. Mr. Kwokaki, Chairman, I rarely agree with you, but I do agree with you this time on the bidding process of the government. And right now, it's a very clear case of collusion in the government. No bids would be accurate, as everyone know. Now you have made the commitment, and now you cannot turn back. The government is incompetent. We have been talking about the bidding system for so long, and you didn't even conduct a review. And from the 500 million to 5 billion, it's a joke. the entire bridge now costs over $100 billion. Everyone knows it's a white elephant. We are waiting for universal retirement protection, and now the government is closing its doors, and those $50 billion is a fake commitment. And I just want to ask a few questions with regards to transportation. And for the 110 or so billion, we are talking about cargo and passenger clearance. And as you all know, a lot of the mainland is capable of handling a lot of cargo already. So why would companies decide to ship their cargo to Hong Kong? Why would our cargo terminals be even more expensive than those in the mainland? For XRL and the bridge, as everyone knows, they are competing with each other. You said the bridge would help coordination between different airports, and the government is trying to force its way to the building the third runway without any valid grounds. And for the self-driving scheme, Hong Kong's roads are really congested and dangerous, and the situation is even worse in the mainland. There are dangerous drivers everywhere. The bridge costs more than $110 billion, and upon completion, the economic value is extremely low. Perhaps that has nothing to do with you. But looking at the projects, the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge is a political tool. It's a white elephant. And Mr. Wong Kok Heng, I echo with him. You are always, you're proposing a lot of works, and the HK FTU was being exploited by the government, and they are agreeing to such useless projects, and you are compromising the interests of the Hong Kong public. Mr. Kwok, I don't really understand your question. You said you expressed your views. I think we should conduct a review. Chairman, I can give you a detailed analysis of the economic gains of the bridge, but I only have 1 minute, so I'll be brief. When we look at the development of the entire Pearl River Delta area, the north of PRD would be a key area in the future development of the region, and the PRD is one of the fastest growing regions of China, and it makes up 9% of the national GDP. So we cannot underestimate the growth of PRD in terms of passenger and cargo growth, and the commissioning of the bridge will enhance connection between Hong Kong and the PRD. We are not saying that we do not need to expand our airport facilities. This is not as simple as that. But we have to ask ourselves what Hong Kong's advantages are when we look at our future development. If our airport further expands when we have the third runway, of course, we'll talk about the gains of that at a later date. My question was about the cargo flow. What are Hong Kong's advantages? How can we attract people to use our cargo facilities? What do we still have any advantages today? As the region develops, the flow of passenger cargoes will be enhanced. So in other words, with the bridge, we have more vehicles, and in terms of more cargo. We have 12 members who would like to ask questions today. Now we only have 1 hour for the policy address item. So now, do members agree for the government to forward the proposal to the PWSC? When this reaches the PWSC, I mentioned some figures. I hope that the administration can share those figures with you. And for the project estimate consultant who was commissioned, and what was the hiring process? So please get back to us on all these questions. Those in favor of this item, please raise your hands.
Those against, please raise their hands. Oh, you claim a division. Yes, it's good to have a division. We would like to know whether the Civic Party is in support of the project. All right, division. Those who are in favor, please raise their hands. Tan Ka Piu, Chan Hat Kan, Ronnie Tong, Chan Han Pan, Chan Kam Lam, Wong Kwok Heng, Tony Jie, Paul Jie, Lo Wai Kwok, Frankie Yek. And I, as the chairman, should remain neutral. Mr. Poon Siu Ping as well. Have you jotted all these down? Yes. Those against, Dr. Kwokaki, Gary Fan, Wu Chi Wai, Lee Chok Yan, Claudia Mo, 6. Apart from myself, there's no abstention. All right. I declare the proposals passed. Mr. Ronnie Tong raised his hand when I asked for those who are in favor of the proposals. Thank you. So, Mr. Ronnie Tong, are you in favor or against the proposals? Against. All right, 10-6 then. 10-6. The proposals are endorsed. Next item on the agenda, briefing by the Secretary for Transport and Housing on the Chief Executive's 2015 Policy Address. We have 1 hour for this. We've got the paper from the administration. Secretary? Briefing, please. Please be brief. We only have 60 minutes. Mr. Chairman, let my colleagues enter the room first. All right. Please be quick. Mr. Chairman, members, on the day before yesterday, the CA released its 2015 policy address. Today, I'm here to introduce to you the contents of the policy address and the policy agenda on land transport. Hong Kong has a huge population, but limited road services. So traffic and transport are closely related to us. Every day, 12 million passenger trips, or 90% of the passenger traffic, are using public transport, far higher than other cities. 42% railways, franchised buses, 32%, minibuses and taxis, 15% and 8% respectively. We'll continue to expand public transport so as to reduce our reliance on private cars, so as to enhance the use of road resources and to create green space. We'll also promote a bicycle-friendly environment. We'll also encourage walking. Railways are our transport background. Of the 5 railway projects, the Western Island Line was commissioned on the 28th of last month. From Sheung Wan to Kennedy, we now have MTR services passing through the Hong Kong U Station. The remaining Sai Ying Pun Station is expected to be commissioned in the first quarter of this year. As for the 4 other projects, the XRL Hong Kong section, Kwun Tong extension, East Island Line extension, and SCL would be commissioned from now till 2021. And then the total length of our railways will be exceeding 270 kilometers with 99 stations, covering over 70% of our population. On the 17th of September last year, Railway Development Strategy 2014 was published. with cost effectiveness and economic benefits and TNT demands. Within the planning period up to 2031, there will be 7 new railway projects. Northern Circular Route, Chiu Mun South Extension, East Kowloon Line, Tung Chung West Extension, Hong Shui Kyu Station, Island Line South Extension, and Island North Line, costing over $110 billion on 2013 prices. Initially, we proposed that between 2018 and 26, we should commission all these projects. The progress timetable will also depend on the development of housing projects along the lines. Safe and efficient railway services are most important to Hong Kong. The government understands that the public has high expectations of railway services. While developing rail lines, the government will actively honor its obligation as the major shareholder of the MTRCL, requesting the company to improve on internal governance so as to maintain high-quality railway services and to complete the new railway projects, and in a timely manner note the risks and reforms facing the corporation. All along, the MTR services have been maintained at an internationally high level, and the number of railway incidents had remained stably. Given the enhanced frequency and services, we need to enhance monitoring. The government will appropriately urge the MTRCL to update its rolling stock and repair and maintenance services. We now have a statutory safety authority, that is the EMSD, and its staff to carry out safety inspection and enhance governance. As our heavy rail lines are developing, we need to systematically review our overall transport infrastructure. In the public transport survey upcoming, we'll study public transport modes, positioning, and roads beyond rail lines. We'll also study concerns in the transport sector so as to have interaction, maintain quality services, and mapping out objectives and strategies for the development of the transport industry. We would like to maintain diversified choices and strike a balance. We would like to restructure bus routes, enhance the use of resources, reduce emission of waste gases to address public demands. We'll have major road infrastructure projects, including the Hong Kong-Macau Bridge, Central Wan Chai Bypass, and the link road to the Eastern Corridor, and the widening of Fanling Road. As regards the Hong Kong-Macau Bridge, we've already reported on its latest progress just now. For Central Wan Chai Bypass and Eastern Corridor link road, the scheduled commissioning date was 2017, but in the process we encountered challenges and unforeseeable circumstances. Works projects had been affected. Later, the Highways Department will report to you. The responsible engineers and the resident staff will make sure that the progress of the work will be maintained, such that the Central Wan Chai Bypass will be commissioned as early as possible to ease traffic congestion on Island North. As regards To Lo Highway and Fanling Highway, the former was by and large completed in March last year, and Stage 2 of Fanling Highway is underway to be commissioned in 2019 to address the ever-increasing traffic demand in the northern NT. While addressing TNT demands, we're also concerned about vehicles, particularly the growth of private cars, leading to deterioration of road conditions. If we can address this problem, members of the public can spend less time on roads and spend more time for other activities. We can also reduce road pollution, benefiting the whole population. Last March, I consulted the TAC on road congestion. At the end of December last year, the TAC submitted a report to me mentioning short and medium-term measures to ease congestion. I'm grateful to the TAC members for their hard work. The government is studying in detail proposals from the TAC, wherein when appropriate will respond. Mr. Chairman, to facilitate members of the public in traveling, we have to improve the environment for pedestrians and bicycles. We would like to have a so-called walkable circumstances, barrier-free accesses and lifts, as well as escalator and lift systems in busy areas will improve the environment for pedestrians. With road safety and pedestrian safety, will promote a bicycle-friendly environment in the new territories. We'll have communication, collaboration with all stakeholders, listen to the views of LegCo members, such that in implementing the various projects, we can perform better to address public needs. Thank you, Secretary. We only have 49 minutes left. 11 members would like to speak. Chan Cam Lam, Wu Chiu Wai, Chen Han Peng, Frankie Yik, Wong Kwok Heng, Gary Fan, Tony Jie, Tan Ka Piu, Li Chok Yan, Michael Tan, Chen Yun Han. Who else? Paul Jie, Pun Xiu Ping. 13 members. So we'll extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Now, I will immediately stop this meeting by 1:15. Mr. Chan Kam Lam. Thank you, Chairman. The Secretary's paper sets out all the details, but I have two questions. The number of seats on PLBs. We have a ceiling at the moment, up to the 20th of June 2016. Now they have 1.5 years for maneuvering. Does the government have any plan to start consultation and study as soon as possible to handle this issue of the ceiling? The franchise of Eastern Harbour Crossing is due to expire. Will a study be conducted to study the franchise? When you take back the franchise, how will you ease traffic congestion in the Eastern District as well as in the Hong Kong Harbour Crossing, Cross-Harbour Tunnel? Well, PLB seats are a concern to us. In our traffic strategy study, we'll particularly study this subject. We would like to complete that strategy study in 2016. If we are to make any important decisions, we'll follow the established procedures. As regards the Eastern Harbour Crossing, indeed, is to be reverted to the government in 2016. We've already started discussion with the operator on details, verification, checking procedures, etc. In the past, we said that we would like to stream the volume of vehicles among the 3 cross-harbour tunnels. We use prices for leveraging. That objective remains unchanged. The question is how to go about it. After the EHC has reverted to the government, with the commissioning of the Central Wan Chai bypass, we'll have another option or more options for streaming among the 3 tunnels. If there are changes in the vehicular volume for the 3 tunnels, we must not allow those changes to affect road conditions. Secretary, I'd like you to take note of the number of PLBs. I mean, the growth in number. You should start discussion with the industry as soon as possible. Because if you have to give us a conclusion by the middle of next year, you really have to start the discussion now. Because you don't just have to listen to the voices of the PLBs. Taxis may also have something to say. I'd like the consultation to start as early as possible. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chan was correct. Public transport involves different modes of transport in different industries. At the moment, we have a subtle balance. So different stakeholders may have different views. Next, Mr. Wu Chiu-ai. Thank you, Chairman. In his opening remarks just now, the Secretary said that he would like to reduce carbon emission, better green living, and so forth. We understand that this transport policy to reduce carbon emission will essentially involve accessibility of pedestrians and bicycle-friendly environment. What about ramps? Our ramp system is not enough. I understand that the feasibility study has been completed, but works are due to start. We don't yet have a commencement date. Are there any resources reserved for this system of ramps proposed, such that we can enhance accessibility? They shouldn't come to us in a piecemeal manner. And then in paragraph 47 of the paper, when the bicycle-friendly environment is mentioned, I only see that the government wants to work on the existing cycle tracks only, and only more bicycle parking facilities will be provided. If you refer to the experience in, say, the European and American jurisdictions, you see that you need to have ancillary measures and facilities for bicycles if that policy is to succeed. There are 2 parts here. First, should you have go-slow lanes for bicycles such that they can give way when traffic is heavy? And then at road junctions, will there be a priority regime for bicycles? That is, are you addressing existing road conditions to facilitate bicycles running on our roads? For this bicycle-friendly policy proposed by you, I don't see those measures. Will you consider better use of road surface such that bicycles will again become a mode of transport and receive equal attention as other modes of transport? Mr. Chairman, for escalator and lift systems, we offer some explanation to this panel or this council in the past. The first 10 of the 18 projects planned will commence. Technical feasibility study will have to be conducted, and then we'll have to obtain resources. I'll defer to the director for the technical feasibility study. We'll adopt a gradual approach in this subject. As regards bicycles, I understand that Mr. Wu is very concerned. I'm also very concerned. Every time when I went on overseas visits, I asked about the situation of bicycles in major cities. I understand there are difficulties, including traffic accidents. That means conflicts between bicycles and motorists, insufficient parking facilities, deserted bicycles, etc., etc. Our existing bicycle-friendly policy is adopted in the new territories and new development areas where we have more space for maneuvering. We'll try as far as possible to have cycle tracks and ancillary measures. But in the urban areas, when roads are already very busy, with difficulties for the buses and other vehicles already, if we are to have a priority lane for bicycles, I'm afraid that in terms of arrangements, I really can't imagine how we can do that. And then some roads bicycles are barred from certain roads. We'll study whether or not they can be open to bicycles as well. 20 seconds. Director, in simple terms, the first 13 projects, save for the 10th with dangerous slopes, are all underway with different degree of advancement. As for the remaining projects, we're doing feasibility study or technical studies.
Thank you. We understand that transport and public housing are two important issues. In the policy address, the CE spent more than 40 paragraphs on housing, and there are only 3 paragraphs about transport. We think transport and housing are equally important issues. We cannot attach more importance to one at the expense of the other. The policy address talks about the Railway Development Strategy 2014. Some of the major infrastructures will be concentrated in Hong Kong and Kowloon, whereas in the NT, you may only provide for some extensions or connections. But the major housing supply will be focused in the new territories. Last month, I asked a question as to how much the population will increase in Tuen Mun and Yuen Long, and I was told that it will be about 400,000. So how are you going to deal with the transport problems arising from the increased population? The West Rail is already saturated. In its policy address, it is mentioned that you will conduct a public transport strategy review. And you talk about the a realignment of the bus routes and so on. But right now the situation is already saturated in the NT. Would you consider adjusting the entire transport strategy or conduct a review or study of the entire transport strategy? I understand that the population in the NT is now increasing. And in the RDS 2014, you have ruled out more railway projects. So in face of the new situation and the rapid growth in population in the NT, would you once again review your RDS 2014 and adopt railway proposals which have been vetoed earlier? I'll try to answer in 3 minutes. Although in the policy address this year, there's less coverage on on transport and more on housing. We all know the housing is the matter of which is the priority concern of our community. But I don't think one should judge the importance of the issue by the number of paragraphs dedicated to that topic. I am responsible for the transport and housing portfolio, and I actually spend more time taking care of the transport issues, roughly 60-70%, because transport is a complex issue involving different modes of transport. In the public transport policy review, we are focusing on the major strategies for the routine transport management, the building of new roads, and so on. These will not be stopped just because we are conducting a public transport policy review. I've heard members expressing concerns about the traffic situation in different parts of the territory, including the NT. I understand that there will be more housing development in NT West. So I will focus my attention on that area to ensure that the residents there can rest assured. For all our housing projects, whenever we consult the views of the public, we've also hear people's concern about transport. In the course of making our plans for any project, we will always conduct a transport impact assessment study. For major projects, we will find out whether or not there will be additional transport requirements, and if so, we will plan accordingly. The RDS 2014 last year, when it was published, we made the plan. We were basing our proposals on the circumstances at the time. If there are any new developments which affect our original assumptions, and if there's any plans giving rise to new needs, we will certainly explore them. So we will not be rigid. Our future plan certainly will need to catch up with the latest planning situation. Secretary, your housing development strategy is like hanging things on a Christmas tree. Like the youth hostel, you say you're going to build them in Yuen Long, and then you also propose to build more elsewhere. Very often, you're not able to cope. So you said that very soon you will review the RDS 2014. So will there be any specific proposals, or can we make proposals to the government as to what new railways we should build? When we announced the RDS 2014 in September last year, we've already taken into consideration all the plannings that were in place up to then. Mr. Yip Chi Ming. Mr. Chang Ban has already said that like Mr. Chen, I'm very disappointed that only 3 paragraphs are dedicated to public transport in the policy address. Secretary, you've been doing a lot of studies regarding public transport, and we support that. But my argument is that since you've conducted all these studies, why would you not consider conducting a CTS4? Last week, I think you've changed your tone, and I therefore said that we will discuss it at the council meeting. You were out of town last time, but I hope you will listen to the unanimous view of members. Members raised many issues. The government had promised us that when doing its urban planning, it will be infrastructure-led, but that seems to have gone. So I'd like to ask the government once again. That is, the meeting was held last week. We all agreed that you should conduct a new transport study. Do you still insist that you won't do it? And secondly, there was a report about how we can improve on traffic congestion. Various options have been proposed. Well, I support some of those options and not others. I don't think the TAC has conducted any public consultation in preparing that report. They might have done it, but I'm not aware of that. The government said that in view of these proposals, you will look into them again. So when are you going to do that? And also, when will you be consulting with the different stakeholders before you make a decision? Secretary. Mr. Yip Chi Ming's suggestion that we should conduct a 4th comprehensive transport study earlier. At the earlier electrical debate, the government has already stated its position clearly. We think that the 3rd CTS, in the 3rd CTS, we propose a broad direction, which the government believe the government is following the broad direction it proposed. That is, we are giving priority to public transport, and railway will be the important backbone of the public transport system, supplemented by other forms of public transport. We also favor road development to parallel road management. So I don't think there's a need to change those broad directions. Since we conducted the RDS last year, and now we have to consider all other forms of public transport, whether it's PLB, ferries, taxis, and buses, and the light rail. So the coverage includes everything which is proposed under CTS. So that we will conduct, and the issues that we will be looking at when we conduct the 4th CTS. But if we say that we should now find a consultant to help us conduct a 4th CTS, that might even, postpone our focus further. So we may as well conduct our public transport study as soon as possible. Chairman, we agree with the conclusions of the 3 earlier CTS. For the public transport study that you're going to conduct in future, there are many things which have been left out. For example, arrangements for car parking. Mr. Wu Chiu raised the question about pedestrian prisons, and equally important. And as I said in the last meeting, the first 3 CTS was basically focused in Hong Kong, and you have not considered our connection with the mainland of China at the border. And I understand that you have not taken that into consideration. I think you must consider that as you see the number of visitors coming to Hong Kong and the growth in freight traffic. And now that we're also going to have the Hong Kong-Macau Bridge and the traffic that will be generated because of that. You have not included those in your earlier study. Regarding parking space requirements, when we follow up on the TAC's recommendations regarding how we can tackle traffic congestion, we certainly take that into consideration. As for cross-border traffic, this is something that we need to face on a daily basis, and there are 2 sides to the issue. We have many people coming from mainland, both visitors and people who come by cars. Mr. Wong Kok Hing, I have 2 questions. First of all, the public transport study. In the latter part of your speech, you briefly referred to that. My follow-up question is that for the public transport study, when are you going to start? How long will be the consultation period? And when will you be able to come to conclusions? Next, regarding the content of the public transport study, may I suggest several topics that you would consider including into your study? First of all, the policy for tolls regarding bridges and tunnels. Secondly, the review of the closed areas and also the question of designating taxi stands in those closed areas. And thirdly, free shuttle bus provided by the MTRCL. The corporation is providing such service in some places, not others. Fifthly, the franchise buses and the fees they charge after the buses cross the Cross-Harbour tunnel. Some of the franchise buses have come up with concessions, which I welcome. But I think we should take a comprehensive look at that policy. Could government consider incorporating these 4 topics into your PTS? And secondly, the monitoring mechanism for railways and also the review of the penalty mechanism. We see that the MTRC is becoming more and more powerful. They have a big impact on our daily transport situation, but incidents happen all the time with the MTRCL. So for the monitoring mechanism regarding the new railways that they're building and the railway system that they're operating, could there be more improvements? And should there be more penalties for any incidents which might occur? Regarding our PTS, we've only just started. At the last meeting, we already briefed members about the whole study, including the review of the various roads and also the different types of public transport services that we'll be reviewing. We hope that before the end of the current session of this council, that is, we'll be able to roughly more or less finish that study, that is before 2016. And because of that, we cannot put too many things into that study. But that doesn't mean that outside of the PTS, we will not deal with other issues which are of concern to us. So, Mr. Wong, ask, for example, whether we can provide for a taxi stand in a certain district. These are the things that we can deal with on a daily basis. Regarding shuttle buses of the MTRC and what changes could be made, if there are any such suggestions, we can certainly talk to the MTRCL. Monitoring of the railway system, and also be it the new railways under construction or new projects of the MTR, these are certainly, subjects of concern to us. Regarding the penalty system and the monitoring mechanism, if there's any room for improvement, we certainly will do it. And going forward, we will increase the establishment of the EMSD to enhance its role as a statutory monitoring body for the MTRCs. But I'd like to state that for all public transport systems in the world, to expect a zero incident is not possible. What we need to look at is to make international comparison to see whether or not the situation is particularly serious in Hong Kong. And that really is not the case. Many international transport organizations have considered Hong Kong to be a forerunner in terms of railway reliability and safety. Sometimes, unfortunately, you may have a few incidents on a single day, but if you look at the duration of the delay and the impact, because nobody would like any delays. We try to do our best, but that doesn't mean that there will be zero incidents. Deputy Secretary, are you very tired? You seem to be dozing off. Sometimes I understand why sometimes Mr. Wong Kok Heng is shouting all the time. He could be reminding the officials not to doze off. Well, you sound like a swine being slaughtered. You're very loud. Being loud doesn't mean that I sound like a swine going to the slaughter. Secretary, I have 3 questions. The 4th CTS, you certainly have noticed that during our debate on the 7th of this month, most members agreed that you should start that study ASAP, but you're still telling us that you will only conduct the PTS. We believe, obviously, that one of the biggest public transport issue is the fact that, well, you've always have this policy of putting priority on railways so that the MTRC has grown at the expense of the other modes of public transport, and people now have fewer choices. The transport policy in Hong Kong has remained the same. If you will not start the 4th CTS, I don't think we'll be able to resolve that problem. And secondly, the government, even though you mentioned how you can deal with the question of bicycles, but you have not proposed to incorporate bicycles as one of the modes of transport but it has been pointed out that the development of a bicycle network is not very satisfactory. We shouldn't just be talking about the construction of cycling tracks. We should really make bicycles a form of public transport, as in the case of Taipei, where people can easily hire a bicycle as a form of public transport. Even if we cannot do it in the urban areas, we can certainly do that in our new towns. Why is the government still not willing to do it and continue to allow transport policy to lag behind those of other major metropolis in the world? Secretary, regarding whether the government should conduct the 4th CTS, during Letco's debate, we've already explained our position. I also explained this again when I answered Mr. Yik Chi Ming's question, so I shan't repeat myself again. But that doesn't mean that issues which are of concern for members we will ignore. Mr. Fan asked whether or not we are adopting a policy of giving priority to the railway. The answer is yes. That's because railways can actually carry more passengers compared with other forms of public transport. But that doesn't mean that we would solely rely on our railway. once a new railway line is commissioned, then people will have fewer choices and bus routes will be cut. Even the RDS 2014 we proposed last year, if they were fully implemented, by that time railway would take up not more than 50% of public transport. In other words, the franchise buses will still be playing a very important role. But we're investing billions of dollars on our railway projects. If the railways do not have sufficient patronage, that investment will not be effective. So we can't have railways at the same time everything remain unchanged for public transport. In which case there wouldn't be a need to develop new railways because it wouldn't be effective. We want many members have tried to fight for the railway system being developed to certain areas, but we still it is still our policy that the public should have choices in terms of public transport. We want to continue to maintain a balanced ecology. As to how franchise buses can play a better role in our forthcoming RDS, we will certainly look into that.
With regards to bikes, I'm aware that many cities have bike sharing schemes. I'm talking to the last 10 years. Many cities have improved tremendously in the past 10 years. We've already missed a lot of opportunities. But the geological conditions might be different. Time's up. The Secretary said they wouldn't conduct another CTS. I'm very disappointed. But I hope the specific studies, including RDS, PTSS, marine transportation studies, cross-boundary transport studies, etc. I think we should have different kinds of studies. We should not only have very limited types of studies. Transportation is very important to our neighboring areas. In terms of planning and development, we should take a more holistic approach. Chairman, when we look at some cases such as Kai Tak, we did not take transportation's considerations into account when we plan projects at Kai Tak, and as such it led to a mismatch of resources. So I hope the government should think and consider different factors as well as possible impacts to the transportation. And in paragraph 50 of the policy address, it mentioned that Kowloon East would be a pilot spot as a starting point for a smart city. And the use of electronic transportation information would be explored. This is something I'm looking forward to. Sometimes we see electronic signboards on the roads showing certain information. For example, the time it takes to move from Hong Ham to Tung Chung. So these real-time information are important because a lack of information would really hamper road users. If these systems are not up to date, we will see problems. So we have to promote electronic transportation information. If we want to be a smart city, this is something we must do. And with regards to public transportation in Hong Kong, the information on the information are very really spread out, and we look forward to having more choices in public transportation. And for PTSS, I hope we can conduct a study on trams. In Hong Kong Island, trams take up a substantial area in Hong Kong Island. Is there anything we can improve? Some people feel that the tram is one of our heritage. So they do not want to make a lot of changes, but it doesn't mean that we cannot make adjustments or refinements. So I hope you can take the trams into account when you conduct this study. As I mentioned, pedestrian-friendly measures are important. Apart from pedestrian areas, we do have decisions to make in some roads. Some roads are very narrow, and the pedestrians have to walk on the roads. And with the growth of private vehicles, we can have some specific zones which are off access to vehicles at specific hours. So this is something we can continue to do. So this is something we can do for our pedestrians on the roads. So these are what I have to say, Chairman. I'm not sure if the administration will respond. I will address the questions one by one. My team of directors are also here today, and they've heard what you've said. Mr. Chair is correct in that RDS and PTSS, we are studying them one by one, but it doesn't mean we don't have a holistic approach. As Secretary, I would look at different modes of transportation, including air, sea, and land, as well as cross-boundary transportation. We will consider a range of factors, and we would consider the overall role of our transportation system. Time's up. Mr. Tenkapyu. Thank you, Chairman. I have two minor questions. I hope the Secretary can take a more sentimental approach. We've been discussing, or we actually took the decision not to do CTS 4. Would you evaluate whether the results of CTS 3 still applies to Hong Kong today? For example, during CTS 3, the government said they would promote green transportation. But today we only have 700 or so electric private vehicles, but the taxes have increased. So I think this is it was a counter effect. And on the monopoly of MTRCL, let's not talk about it at the moment. For KMB buses, their fleet has shrunk by at least 300. So are you going to conduct an evaluation? I appreciate the paper you have prepared. It's very detailed, and it outlines what you are going to do and what you have done. And on the bridge tolls, why don't you conduct any reviews of the bridge tolls? And the Qingyi Lantao bridge is very expensive, and so there are a lot of inconsistencies in the toll fees of different bridges. For example, the Stonecutters bridge is free of charge. Are you going to conduct a holistic review of the toll strategy of bridges in Hong Kong? The Hong Kong administration is have been here for 2 years. The current term has been here for 2 years, and we have 5 bureaus. We have 14 bureaus, and the Secretary, you are in charge of 2 different aspects. So you said housing is of paramount importance, but you've spent more than 60% of your time on transportation. So my question is, 2 years on, if the proposal to have 14 bureaus was approved, would it really help with the situation of Hong Kong? Can you evaluate this situation? So, is that what you meant by asking me to be more sentimental? I was invited to join the administration to tackle housing issues, so I did not expect myself to handle housing, transportation issues. Transportation is a very multifarious issue, and so this it's only natural that transportation issues have used up much of my time. Housing is another very important field. So if the proposed restructuring went ahead, it might be a good thing looking back. And on your other question, we never gave up on the idea of green transportation. This is something we really want to do. And on the on the concessions of the first registration tax for green vehicles, were they really effective? This was mentioned in the earlier report, so this is something we will look at. In terms of policy, we encourage electric vehicles, but we also have to consider charging stations, the usage time, etc. And we have to look at cost considerations of the vehicle, so we have to consider all these factors. And with regards to CTS3, more than 10 years have passed. Are you going to evaluate the implementation results in the past 10 years or so? We look at the latest issue when we conduct such reviews. Mr. Lee Cheng-yan. In the policy highlights, there's nothing new with regards to transportation. And the administration said they would enhance monitoring of MTRCL. So does it mean that you accept the fact that monitoring of the MTRCL was inadequate in the past? And as such, we came up with this freak, so to speak, and there have been no monitoring in place. So I'm sure a lot of Hong Kong people have experienced great congestion in the cabins. And the MTRCL is making more than $10 billion. And they said they have a lot of, they are providing a lot of concessions, but they are refusing to provide any rebates. Have you ever discussed or evaluated the feasibility? We are looking at a monster, and this project would be borne by the government, and whereas the income would go towards MTRCL, and they will get all the benefits while you are bearing the cost. So why don't you just buy out the entire project? And for the congested compartments, what would you do? Right now, the MTR extends until Kennedy Town, and soon it will extend towards Sai Ying Pun. We will have a lot of congestion in Admiralty Station. I don't see any mitigation measures, and you said 2 of the MTR lines will pass Tamar or Admiralty. But looking at your priorities, we are not sure when it will be completed. And you said the Chiu Mun South line will be finished by 2031. We are looking at 17 years later. So the overall planning of the MTR network cannot meet the public demands. And the west line will be saturated very soon. And you said you will develop a station at Hong Sui Kiu. right now there seems to be zero coordination. You said you will conduct transportation studies, but at the end, you could not come up with a solution, and the public will be the ones who suffer. So the first question is about rebates by MTR, and second, on the overall planning, can we do something to ease the congestion? Can we adopt the Kowloon rail approach? MTRCL is a listed company, and as a listed company, even though the government owns almost 77% of the shares, we have to respect the operational plan of a listed company. They would have some ordinances in place. I hope these are constructive, but we would step up our monitoring of the MTRCL. As a listed company, the MTRCL has a public objective, and they must operate according to the government's transport strategies. And on the issue of congestion in compartments, I think we are looking at several issues. First of all, can we increase the number of trains? And for train frequency, it really depends on the signaling system. And the MTRCL has plans to upgrade the existing signaling systems, but it takes time. And on the saturation of the West Line, as Mr. Yao, the Undersecretary, said, we will reach saturation sooner or later. So we will look at the situation in West New Territories. And for the new rail lines, and in the RDS 2014, our planning will persist until 2031, but it doesn't mean that we won't have completed projects before that. And the first line will be the northern line. And now it's my turn. I have 3 questions. The New People Party is supportive of the proposal to upgrade the artificial island to become a transportation infrastructure that links Hong Kong Island with Western New Territories. If after the consultancy study, if they find the bridge a viable solution, you mentioned that the project was headed by the Development Bureau, and it has nothing to do with you. If this is what the consultant eventually says, so the case will be similar to East Kowloon. It will be in charge of the Development Bureau. So the question is, who will be in charge? Will it be the Development Bureau, or will it be the THB? And so if you are going to be in charge, why aren't you also in charge of the East Kowloon structure and or projects? You said you would consider different requests. So would you introduce a new agenda to incorporate all our suggestions? Is there any agenda items which can tackle these issues? So I'd like to know what you think. And my third question is on the service of MTRCL. We have an operating director called Professor Kim. I find him rather competent, but he has to be responsible for many railways. So I'm really puzzled. How can he handle so many projects at the same time? So would you consider splitting the department into 2, one in charge of urban lines and one suburban lines? And under the board, you have an engineering committee, and will you consider introducing a new committee to ensure quality services? You have to tackle issues like overhead cables and insulators. Will you consider introducing a new committee to monitor the service standards in order to help Professor Kem and ask in order to secure more resources? On the suggestion for CTS4, I think I have addressed the question many times earlier. But of course, for issues outside of the scope of PTSS, if you have if members have any comments, we are happy to listen. I'm not encouraging a so-called Christmas tree approach. We cannot focus on so many things at the same time. On the development of the artificial island on the Central Waters, for the impacts caused to transportation, the government's approach is that we would do it if necessary.
A transport-based infrastructure project will be led by our bureau, but for overall urban planning, be it the artificial islands in the Central Waters or Lantao development, the Development Bureau will be leading those projects. If there's to be a Cross-Harbour bridge or an elevated system in East Kowloon, who will be responsible? I don't think the positioning of that proposal is traffic and transport. But if it has something to do with traffic and transport, then it will be in my portfolio. What about MTRCL? We would like to see good results as regards manpower arrangement, management structure, and so forth. The government will respect the MTRCL. Will you pass my 2 suggestions to them? Mr. Chairman, concerning services, after the XRL incident, it is suggested that a risk assessment committee be set up apart from a works committee. That is to address maintenance risks and other issues mentioned by you. Ms. Chen Yunhan, I've been raising my hand for a very, very long time. Well, I'll call the Bureau Director Professor instead of Secretary. Why? Because the whole transport system is problematic. In your paper, you mentioned air pollution, traffic congestion, and so forth. And our colleagues mentioned a number of problems. If we view TNT from an old angle, without giving consideration to Hong Kong's development, then we are actually lagging behind. So I'm worried about those officials sitting here. I'm afraid that they're adopting a patchy approach. They don't have new ideas. A few years ago, there's an article in the Economic Journal. Yes, according to public opinion, TNT should come first. But if you adopt a piecemeal manner, then the 300-odd kilometers of roads in East Kowloon is a very good example. It's problematic, and our suggestions have not been addressed. Say, for example, in Anderson Road, you're going to have a new population intake of 70 to 80,000 people. Mr. Alan Leung said that it will take the residents 45 minutes to come downhill. Well, if there's to be this Anderson Road development project and you cannot resolve TNT problems, why don't you link it up with East Kowloon? You are always adopting a fragmented approach in addressing problems. You cannot jump out of the box. Please model on Boston, where they have a whole road underground. Throughout the whole world, many jurisdictions are doing the same. Why should roads be at grade? You say you're going to study Happy Valley, you're going to study this and that. I won't oppose that approach, But you have to change your mindset. You have to change your mindset. A patchy and piecemeal as well as fragmented approach won't work. We're lagging far behind. Air pollution, traffic congestion, etc. All these problems are emerging. As regards the CTS, oh yes, we need a CTS. Professor, if you use old-fashioned thinking, it won't work. A few years ago, with a number of enthusiastic cyclists, we cycled all the way to Central. We have Eastern Corridor and a number of projects by the waterfront. Why can't we have a cycle track all the way from Chai Wan to Shangwan and Western District? There were a number of private lots back then along that track. People living on Hong Kong Island can just cycle to work. At that time, I went to many government departments with chairman. Nobody listened to us. The government has been lagging behind, lagging far behind public aspirations. Professor, you are a scholar. How will you view the present conditions? Can you still adopt a fragmented approach? The problem is ever growing and deteriorating. Mr. Chairman, this is a big issue. 1 minute. Before I joined the government, I also criticized that the government shouldn't adopt a patchy and fragmented approach. Now, in our bureau, our colleagues are doing something. We would like to have breakthroughs. We would not like to have new ideas. But day after day, we're under pressure. There are risks attached to new ideas and innovation. So we need both, and I'm doing both. Yes, we're thinking of certain facilities like cycle tracks, but we have to face specific problems. Take, for example, underground roads. We do consider them. But underground roads also have problems. I have bureau colleagues and departmental colleagues here, where and when possible, we'll try to implement new ideas. Certain measures are feasible in major cities elsewhere in the world. That has something to do with public acceptance, as well as the willingness to accept risks. Mr. Porte, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to further follow up on Ms. Chen Yunhan's questions. It's always correct to criticize the government for makeshift measures and fragmented approaches, but I think the Secretary had already duly addressed those problems. As for the Undersecretary, Mr. Yao, I have friends who are very thoughtful. In particular, East Kowloon is a very problematic district. For the public transport strategy study, in the annex of the paper, diversification, ecological considerations, etc. are mentioned. Buses, taxis, light rail, trams, etc. are mentioned. But there's nothing about escalators for pedestrians. We are a hilly city, particularly on Hong Kong Island. Instead of building cycle tracks, it's better to build more pedestrian systems, both on land and at sea. Of course, for flat countries like Denmark, cycle tracks are very suitable. Of course, I don't oppose cycle tracks. So what about escalators? Will they be included in the public transport strategy study? This will be helpful in easing traffic congestion and reducing emission. As regards Universal Accessibility Program, there is a detailed explanation of 14 out of 250 sites have been prioritized or given priority. But what about the remaining 200-odd proposals? Have you given them up or will they be launched in phase? Number 3, for the escalator system I proposed just now, 18 sites have been shortlisted. And for T1 Shan, because of the SCL, it will be given priority. And because of urban redevelopment projects, the one in Yutwa Street will also be given priority. What about the remaining? Are they to wait for redevelopment projects? And then these sites were shortlisted in 2009. Things have changed. The Kowloon Mine site, the Anderson Road development project, etc. These are new sites proposed. Will you build such systems earlier for them, be it universal accessibility program or escalators for pedestrians, a number of departments, private housing estates, MTRCL, etc., will be involved. Take, for example, energizing East Kowloon. Should you not have a coordinating department such that we don't need to knock on the door of each and every department to resolve problems? Well, Secretary, you have to provide a very quick answer, like Mr. Zhe's questions. For the mid-level escalator system, we did note the proposal, but some of the proposals are rather expensive, and we need many, many years for planning and implementation. Some of them cost up to hundreds of millions of dollars. 18 on the list are being followed up, but we have to launch those given priority first. We understand the waiting time on the part of the residents, but we shouldn't underestimate the problems involved in the works projects. For example, we have to study whether or not there are opposition voices in the local communities or supporting voices. For the Universal Accessibility Program, we do accord the program priority. But for private programs of this sort, they're not covered by us. For private projects like those under the link read, without their active participation, it won't work. 15 more seconds, Secretary. In terms of implementation, can we have more transparency? Well, we would like to disseminate more information. Final speaker, Mr. Pun Siu Peng. Thank you, Chairman. We're most concerned about railways insofar as TNT is concerned, because railways are mass transit systems. Just now the Secretary said that he would continue to honor the obligations of the government as the major shareholder of the MTRCL. He told us that he would not take back the MTRCL. But in Hong Kong, the MTRCL has no rivals. There's no competition. How are you going to enhance internal governance? Any specific arrangements? Besides, I'd like to know more about the SCL. We understand that monuments and archaeological sites have been discovered, thus affecting works progress. Can you catch up in time? Will the SCL be commissioned on schedule? If not, any contingency plans? And then just now you said that you will study the overall transport arrangements for Hong Kong and you will inspect the respective roads of different modes of transport. What about the specific arrangements? When will you start the studies? And when will they be completed? Any specific arrangements? Concerning the public transport strategic study, we would like to have a comprehensive result by 2016 before the end of this term of the electrical. As for positioning, we would enlist support from a consultancy. You can refer to the annex here. Understand that the panel has arranged public hearings. We'll listen to the views of deputations and individuals. As regards the SEO, archaeological work has affected the work schedule. We're at least 10 months behind schedule. We would, of course, like to catch up. We would like the MTRCO to catch up as far as possible. Still, there is a risk of slippage. For the Hong Kong Station section, probably that will be delayed to 2019. As regards the MTRCL, railways involve huge investment, and it's difficult to engage many operators. In the past, we have the MTR and the KCR. In 2007, they were merged. At that time, there was a comprehensive debate in society. At that time, the view was that a merger would be able to consolidate all resources, etc. But now we have this monopoly problem. We don't want the MTRCO to monopolize the market, but MTRCO is very important insofar as public transport is concerned. But we will maintain other modes of public transport like franchised buses. The government is the major shareholder of the MTRCO, so will ensure that its operation is in public interest. One follow-up question. What about new railways? Existing railways are under the MTRCO. The MTRCL is a listed company. Although you are the major shareholder, your powers are limited. Last year, we published 7 railway projects in the 2014 RDS. We have to follow the agreement signed between the government and the MTRCO. If there are new projects which should go to the MTRCL, they have the priority to speak first. So much for this conclusion. Here, I have to praise you, Secretary. You have been speaking non-stop for 2.5 hours. My colleagues have been listening to members. Any other business? No? Not much time left. Next meeting, 27th of February, Friday at 10:45 a.m. Meeting adjourned.